Good morning. Wow, welcome home to me. Comcast is not my friend this morning, but hey, made it. And we'll have this as a recording for anyone who was here earlier and did not have the fortitude to wait for my technical issues to be done. Maybe I just need to try to switch away from Comcast, although that's a little bit difficult. I wanted to make sure that everyone can hear me this morning since I had so many problems with the audio last week. So if anyone can hear me, please say yes. That'd be really awesome. Before we get started, all the buttons look like they're working now. My internet looks like it's working. Everything is working now. I just want to make sure that it actually is. So if anything isn't working, let me know. Okay. Cool. So we have a few questions that came through Christina's desk this week, and any questions that you guys have, please pop into the chat. Any follow-up questions, anything that you want to clarify from what we're going over, just pop right into the chat, and the chat is working this time as well. So much better than last week's issues with the chat. So awesome, thank you. The first question that we've been getting a ton of lately is my product reviews are missing all of a sudden. Can I get them back? If so, how? And if not, what should I do moving forward? So a little bit of background on the product review thing. A couple years ago, as most of you know, Amazon used to allow paid incentivized reviews as long as you had that little blurb that says, I bought this, I got this for a discount in exchange for my honest and unbiased review. And of course, they weren't actually honest or unbiased, not on purpose, actually. That's kind of the funny part. A lot of people did think they were being honest and unbiased, but the kind of mental issue of having something for free is that you actually treat it like it's better than it actually is. And so all of these honest and unbiased reviews were all about a third to a half a star better. It was around there. So a product that would have been, say, 3.5 stars was almost 4 with the honest and unbiased reviews. So that obviously kind of was a problem for Amazon because the reviews are the backbone of Amazon's whole system. So they basically were like, okay, so we're not going to do that anymore. And they turned it off. Then probably, last year there was a bunch of takedowns for review manipulation, people using the Facebook groups and doing reimbursements and such. And this year, they decided that the process that they had been using for enforcing was not good enough. And they started taking down really big sellers. We've heard of sellers making 2 million plus a month being shut down for review manipulation. And they were more strict about it, not letting people back on. And then we started seeing thousands and thousands of reviews disappearing. Now, what they're doing is they're actually using basically models, predictive models. If your product's reviews don't fit within the predictive model's expectations of what your review should be, then they're taking down reviews because it's really difficult to tell what is a legit review and what's not with some of the techniques that people are using. So they know what a typical review process looks like. They know what a standard review chart, basically a standard distribution curve looks like. And so they're using that to determine whether or not someone manipulated reviews. So that's the long answer. The short answer is probably you can't get them back. We recommend keeping copies of everything. We use Feedback 5 for that. So keep copies of all the reviews that come in. There's different places that reviews are kept. And so if you're trying to reach Amazon and have them research why a particular review is gone, first of all, you do need to do it per review. So keeping track of that is kind of crazy if you've got thousands of them, but you do need to do that and keep track of all of your reviews per product by the review ID. The review ID is in the URL, the one that starts with an R. It's a long string of letters that comes up with an R. So if you're worried about potentially losing your reviews, make sure you have a list of them. Then when you have them disappear, then you need to file tickets. And I know you're going to hate this, per review. They're going to have to investigate per review what happened. So if you have 1,000 that were taken down, do not file 1,000 cases at once. They will hate you. Just file a few cases at once and see what they say. As far as being able to get them back, usually they've taken them down because you missed some sort of model. If you use something like ManyChat or some other sort of automated Facebook bot to get reviews, then that may be a problem for you because they will come in faster than Amazon's standard model expects. So we've had clients who are like, oh man, I got a 1-star review. This is terrible. I don't have any other 1-star reviews. And I'm like, good. now you have a standard distribution curve. You want that. So that can be the frustrating thing about this, is that even if all of your stuff is organic because people love it, or you've got some sort of card in the box, or you're saying, hey, please review us, or people just really love your product, if it doesn't fit an expected basically review map, you're going to have potentially problems because there's just so many cheaters with the reviews. So going forward, just don't do anything that would get you reviews too fast. I think that's the basic thing is you need to have an organic review process. Now, Feedback Genius, Feedback 5, some of the other ones to request reviews, those are fine. Those ones result in a fairly normalized pattern. Even insert cards in the product saying, hey, please review us. We love reviews. But anything like, there was some really successful folks out there using ManyChat where they were getting something like 1,000, 2,000 reviews in a couple days. That's going to be flagged. So don't do stuff like that. Yeah, we've just been seeing a lot of really harsh enforcement there. So be careful with the reviews. Next question is how to get rank and reviews without breaking the rules, which is a very good question. I find it funny because people always say like, oh, Amazon's changing the rules again. They're changing the rules. And Amazon does not actually change the rules very often. Pretty rarely actually is the actual prohibited seller activities page changed. What they do is they change how they enforce the rules. Sometimes they get better at enforcing the rules. Sometimes they change their models, like they did with the review stuff where they actually created models and then started enforcing on it. So in this case, one thing that I find hilarious in a kind of like dark comedy kind of way is that there are entire companies based on this whole giveaway strategy so that you can manipulate rank and get on page 1 using giveaway strategies. There's entire companies whose whole thing it is to do this, and it's literally in black and white in the prohibited seller activities. Go look it up if you don't believe me. It says that activities that are meant for the sole purpose of manipulating product rank are prohibited. So this is a completely prohibited activity, doing these giveaways. I do not recommend it. If you do it, then make sure that you don't do a huge discount. Amazon will give you a warning if you do more than 70% off. So don't do more than 70% off. And if you do more than 70% off, a lot of these sites don't work because the users have grown to expect 99% off. So it makes it a little difficult. So what I would recommend for getting reviews and rank without breaking the rules is first, slow down, be more patient, because doing it the way that Amazon built their system to work takes at least a couple months. And that's why a lot of people cheat because they don't want to take a couple months. So trying to get to page 1 on a particular search term, the slow, correct way that Amazon set it up to be is you want to basically start out with your product and you have coupons. I highly recommend coupons rather than discounts or promotions because promotions show up at a weird spot on the page and they're really bad for sellers, whereas coupons show up in the search results actually. So coupons can be better. So you have a pretty hefty coupon, not super hefty, but pretty hefty, like 40, 50%. Then you lower the actual price too, so that the price that people are paying is quite low. But it's not super high off of the original price, right? You don't want to have 99% off. You don't want to have more than 70% off. Like 40, 50% is fine. Then you advertise the heck out of it for the specific keywords that you want to rank for. And you make sure that your product has that in the title and that it actually can rank for those keywords. That's the key thing. You don't want to try to rank for something that it won't rank for naturally anyway. You want to make sure that you select your maybe 3 things that you're going to advertise heavily for and have a big budget for very carefully. Then you just really heavily invest in those. Typically what we recommend is having those keywords and then having variations on those keywords using something like merchant words, and you can find other variations on your primary 2 or 3 keyword phrase. Generally speaking, if you're just starting out, I do not recommend going for the single word phrase. So if you're selling a t-shirt, don't go for t-shirt. T-shirt is too competitive. Go for the longer strings. That's much easier to rank for at first. Once you start ranking for something like that and get some solid income coming in from one of the lower hanging fruit keyword phrases, then you can start working on the more difficult competitive ones. But because Amazon's an algorithmic system, it takes it a couple weeks to figure out if you're even going to succeed in ranking for that phrase. That's why you want to advertise. Once you convince it that you're good, then it'll start ranking you higher and higher and higher, because Amazon's whole purpose is to sell product. If your product showing up higher in the search ranking results in a product sale for Amazon, they'll keep ranking you higher. That's what they care about. Is it going to sell? So if you can consistently sell and you can make sure that it's a low cost product enough where people will buy it and take a risk on a new product. You also want to enroll in the early reviewer program. It's the only approved way that Amazon will let you have reviews. So enroll. It's only $60. It's worth it. Those are the 5 reviews that Amazon can't take away. That's the easy thing there. So that would be the correct way to do it without breaking the rules. And then you just consistently make sure you continue to advertise on those keywords. You have to always have those advertisements on and running. It's pay to play, right? Make sure that you're constantly showing up on page 1, at the top of the page, in the middle of the page for those keywords that you want to rank for. Okay. The next question that came through from our desk is HAZMAT, how to get approved, why is it necessary, what should I know about it in general. So HAZMAT stands for hazardous materials, and it refers to the DOT, Department of Transportation, or IATA regulations, and IATA is IATA, like the International Air Traffic, whatever, Administration, something like that. Anyway, it's about international transit of goods. The requirements are all basically around human health and safety. So if something could cause basically harm to the person carting it around or working where it's stored, then it needs to have special storage and packaging requirements. So that's what HAZMAT basically is. There are a few HAZMAT fulfillment centers in the United States. There used to only be 1, then there were 2, then they started expanding out more. I'm not sure how many there are now, but they keep expanding the FBA program as they add more HAZMAT cages. So as I mentioned, they can be hazardous to health of the person carting it around and the person where it's stored. So for example, things that you would not expect to be HAZMAT are like perfume. Perfume is HAZMAT. There's enough alcohol in perfume to basically explode, and then most perfume is held in glass bottles. So you've got potential for, if they heat up, for the combustion point to explode. Now, one thing that's kind of a fun little fact, if you put, say, an aerosol can, like hairspray aerosol can, in the same bin as a lithium-ion battery, they will explode, and there will be a fire. So things like things that you normally use in everyday life, sometimes people don't realize that they are very hazardous. Lithium-ion batteries are all over the place. I think everyone's got a can of hairspray. Well, every woman at least has at least a can of hairspray, regardless of how much she uses it. She probably has a can of hairspray at her house. And these things can be very dangerous if put in close proximity. So they are completely segregated, and they have to go in separate totes. They have to be managed separately. So Amazon has to keep control of this through a huge network, making sure that no hazardous materials get into bins, making sure that hazardous materials that do get into bins don't get into together, they don't get shipped together. So it's pretty complicated for them. So they don't want just anybody doing it yet. They want to make sure that anyone who's part of the HAZMAT program understands HAZMAT, understands what it's for, how it's stored, how it's labeled, etc. So getting into it, you usually have to be pretty successful selling merchant fulfilled for your HAZMAT items. You usually have to be able to sell it and show that you understand how to ship and manage HAZMAT. You can't just show up with essential oils one day and then say, I'm shipping HAZMAT FBA. Like, they want you to know what you're doing first. So that's important. Learn how to do it fulfilled by merchant first, and then petition Amazon to be part of the FBA program. One thing that you should know about HAZMAT in general is that a lot of products are flagged as HAZMAT that aren't. And then you need to fill out your exemption form. So get used to filling out the exemption forms if you do almost anything in health and beauty. We have a couple of clients in that space who regularly get products stuck in stranded inventory because of of Amazon rechecking the HAZMAT requirements. Every single time you upload new information, it runs it through the classification systems at Amazon as a new ASIN. And that's to make sure that if you added new important information that would then classify it as HAZMAT, they check it. So every single time you upload or save and finish, and it says, great, thank you for your submission, it runs it back through the classifier. That's why something that's been selling for a really long time can then be flagged, because somebody made a change to it that then got it flagged. And that's the same thing for all of the classification systems. So if you have something come in and you know it's not HAZMAT, say you have a AA batteries in it, not lithium ion, great, then just fill out the exemption form and submit it, and it should take a couple days and then you're fine. If it's not fine, then you may need to escalate.
Rachel, what is the kind of the follow-up question to that is, what documentation would somebody need who has been flagged as a HAZMAT product and they submitted their exemption and Amazon came back or didn't respond at all, and it's still just kind of locked up in the system? Is there some kind of documentation, compliance doc that they can show to Amazon or through an escalation that says, hey, this legitimately is not HAZMAT?
So if you put in an exemption form and it's not getting accepted, it means something about your detail page still looks like it's HAZMAT. So there's something about it that makes them not feel comfortable approving it. And these are people on the other end who are reviewing this. So based on their training and experience, they're going through the exemption form, they're looking through all the information, and they're saying, yeah, I don't feel comfortable approving this, because what happens if it goes wrong? They're going to be the ones who are blamed. So you need to find a way to convince that person on the other end that your product is safe. That means looking at your listing. Is there something about it that makes them think it's HAZMAT? Does it say alcohol somewhere? Does it say lithium-ion battery? Well, then that's a problem, because it's definitely HAZMAT. So there's certain things that sometimes people think aren't HAZMAT, but actually are. The classification teams at Amazon are pretty good. So if you're getting stuck for some reason, it means you've got some sort of data discrepancy where they think, based on the data over here, that it's probably HAZMAT, and you think you're fine. So you need to be going through that detail page with a fine-tooth comb, add more information to the exemption sheet, whatever it needs to be, to where the person on the other end can feel comfortable with what they're approving.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Next thing on the list is category and subcategory ungating. How can I figure out if my chosen product will be gated before I even start? What classifies as a medical device? Why does everybody else get to sell but I don't? I feel like this is like my son asking me why Lily gets to do things and he doesn't. So there are some requirements that are labeled in the help, and you can figure them out that way. But a lot of it you're not going to know until you actually complete your listing and submit it, and the category that you chose is gated, category, subcategory. On the page creation, I think it's called category item type or something like that. In any case, at Amazon, it's called ITK, the item type category. And that is the kind of third level down. So the first level down is like books and home and garden and computers, whatever, electronics. And then the next one down is computers and accessories, or camping equipment. And the next level down below that is like tents. That's the level that they are gating at. So if you happen to create a new listing for a medical device, and medical devices are much broader than you might expect. For example, my toothbrush is a medical device. So don't expect that your product is not a medical device or not regulated. Double check first. And once you list it, then you'll know if it's gated or not. Now, I know that's not super helpful. Excuse me. But Amazon is very reactive. So whenever there is a problem or there is a perception of risk, then they'll start gating subcategories. So just because there's a regulation on your product doesn't mean it's necessarily gated. Just because there isn't a regulation on your product doesn't mean it's necessarily ungated. They'll gate for safety issues as well, even if there's not regulations in place. So for example, we've seen reviews of product and difficulties listing on things like water filters, replacement water filters in refrigerators and water faucets, kitchen water faucets, because of the my opinion, I don't know if this is true or not, but my opinion is because of the press that was happening around the Flint water crisis. A lot of people were trying to put water filters in their homes to where they could protect themselves from lead poisoning. And there were some cheap, crappy Chinese water filters that weren't safe. They weren't actually filtering out enough lead. And so Amazon gated the whole thing and started evaluating all of the products that were in that subcategory. And that's not a legal requirement. That's something, and obviously you can get sued if someone gets lead poisoning from your water filter that failed, but that's unusual. It's hard to prove a negative. So Amazon basically was just like, no, this is the right thing for customers, so we're going to do it. So keep in mind that Amazon isn't necessarily following the regulations there. They're following regulations plus. It's always going to be a regulations plus whatever would be the right thing to do for customers. So just be aware of that. But for category ungating, subcategory ungating, category ungating, they tell you which ones are gated and they even tell you how to get through. For subcategory ungating, it's almost always due to counterfeit and safety issues. And so they're not going to tell you about that until you get stuck. Then you need to fix it. So what classifies as a medical device? So go to the FDA.gov website and immerse yourself if you're really going to make a medical device, and that's FDA.gov. But what classifies as a medical device is basically any type of product that's used for health and human safety. So a medical device could be something like a toothbrush. So like I just mentioned, that's a medical device. Something like a heating pad is a medical device. You wouldn't think it, but it is. Then you have the more obvious ones, like the medical devices that we know of are like the ones that are fully regulated, like pacemakers or like replacement hip joints. Those are obvious medical devices, things that hospitals use, things that doctors use. Then there's the ones
diabetic materials seem to be a big one for diabetics, insulin.
Yeah, so those ones are all fully regulated by the FDA. They have to be approved ahead of time. Those medical devices are regulated kind of like drugs. Then you have kind of a middle ground, and those ones are the class 2 medical devices. And for those ones will sometimes require pre-market approval. Sometimes you can get it through with Amazon with a 510K. Sometimes you can say that it's substantially similar to one that already got approved. So there's a middle ground where if your product is in that middle ground, like if it's one of the actual like proper medical devices that a doctor needs to prescribe and so on, you need to be part of a special program for that. There's certain ones where you can sell it to Amazon business customers if you've got a particular license. There's really detailed requirements around that. For the ones in the class 2 category, you need to know what the real requirements are around your product specifically. Because you could be able to sell it on Amazon, or you might get it shut down. So you really need to know where you fall on that line in between. And then pretty much all class 3 devices can be sold on Amazon. There's a difference with like the UK. They switch their classes, and so it can be kind of confusing. But basically things like toothbrushes, heating pads, all those things are fine on Amazon. But be aware that if you are selling a medical device, even if it's one of the kind of home use type ones, you're still supposed to register with the FDA. Amazon doesn't check that, but you're still supposed to. They could get mad at you upon import. So be aware of that. Why does everybody else get to sell, but I don't? It's because of whatever you put in your page. If you put in your page a different item type category and they all put something else in it, then they get to sell and you don't. So it all comes down to what's on the page and what the brand is in the case of brand gating. In the case of item type category gating, it's because they have a different ITK than you do, and that one isn't gated. So that's where it comes down to. It's all based on what is put into the catalog. And if you put a particular thing into the catalog that raises a flag, then it's going to be gated. Okay. Next question was, can we recommend products that are doing really well right now? And I think that's kind of a funny question because there's always products that are doing really well. You have all the standard commodity products. Those ones are always going to do well. I think that there's some interesting kind of parallels with many of the wholesale presentations that I've seen given by Eddie Levine and Robin Johnson, and they always whenever they're together, it's always fun to watch them present together. If you ever get a chance, it's pretty fun. But if you're trying to choose a product that's doing well and you're kind of coming at it from a reseller perspective, then there are various approaches for doing that, finding the top ranked products in the category and trying to get a wholesale account and then sharing the buy box. That's one approach. That's Eddie's approach. Then you have Robin's approach, which is find an interesting and unusual small business and try to build them up under the radar. Robin likes to have a lot of smaller accounts instead of a few bigger accounts. And so that way she can spread her risk out. So that's one approach. If you're talking about products that are doing well from a private label perspective, like say I'm trying to expand out my product line, how do I choose a product that's doing well? The people who we've found that are extremely successful at this are listening to their customers. And they're listening to their customers in two ways. The first is they're listening to what their customers are saying or complaining about on their existing products, looking at customer reviews, looking at Q&A, and finding complementary new products that kind of dovetail with their existing product line. Then the second one are folks who have they basically have wholesale or liquidation partners, and they are seeing what customers are saying about the branded products. Now, this can be a really solid strategy if you are already a wholesaler or a arbitrage reseller. You already know what people are going for. You already know what the interest level is on this particular type of product or that particular type of product because it's selling well for you. So if that one is selling well for you, then it is a good opportunity for launching your own product and improving the page, improving the advertising, being able to gain rank over it. So for example, we have a client who has a reseller business and he's doing fine on Amazon. It's not anything to write home about, but it's fine. So basically he used the reseller information because he does his own website, and his own website is very successful. He's using the reseller information to basically decide which items are the ones that he's going to go into for his own brand. So he's got an ongoing income stream from his own website and from selling on Amazon, and he's using that to create his own product line on Amazon and on his website, so that he can then direct customers on his website to buying his product. He can direct customers on Amazon to buying his product while he's using the data from the reselling to know which items customers are looking for. So data is absolutely critical. I know that a lot of people like using things like Jungle Scout or Scope, and that's fine if you know nothing else. If you are someone just jumping into this and you want to do private label, go for it, fun. I have found them to be wildly off. I found them to be right on. It depends on the product. It depends on the category, the subcategory. And it can be kind of frustrating if you had something that looked super good on Jungle Scout and everything looked great, and then you launched it and it's just like, wah, wah. The ones who have done best, in my experience, have been people who had some sort of reason to believe that something would be successful, either through their arbitrage business or through their wholesale business. They had a really solid concept for what they were doing, and they had an ongoing income stream. That's so important, whether you're still employed elsewhere and so you can afford to invest in your business, or you have an ongoing income stream that is separate from your new branded products business. That's so important because your money will be tied up for months at a time with a branded products business, and usually you have to buy your second round of product before you've even sold through the first one. So you need quite a lot of money to invest in that, and so having an ongoing income stream besides that is going to be really important. The other thing is that if something is doing really well right now, then probably the people who are succeeding right now actually invested and launched that product like 6 months ago. So you always have to be thinking ahead with products that are new, what's happening. So like right now is actually when Amazon, when I was working there, was working on their outdoor product line. So end of summer is when you start working on what's going to be going next summer, because you need to put all of your purchase orders in by October 1st if you're ordering for next summer. The reason being is because if you get in by October 1st, you get a spot in the production line for the factory, because the busiest time of year for factories is January, because everything needs to ship out before Chinese New Year, because they basically shut down for 6 weeks. Then they've got to rehire to get new people going. So it takes a while for them to get back up and running. And by the time they are, it's already in March, and they can't produce and ship in time for the outdoor season. So you need to have your purchase orders in by about October to get that spot in line at the factory to be able to ship in January. So things like what's doing well now is only helpful to you when you start preparing for it. Say something is doing well for back to school, then you need to have submitted your purchase order for it by like February. So what's doing well now is maybe not the right question. It's what can do well and what's the right timeline for me to invest in that kind of product. Okay, last question that we have for today, and anyone feel free to jump in with any other questions you have. Product
I do have one more question if we can get to it. So go ahead, but I'll let you know. Go ahead.
What is product classification and why is it helpful? Can Cascadia help me figure out what the requirements are for other countries like Canada and Europe? Product classification, I mentioned that when we were talking about HAZMAT. Amazon has a bunch of classification systems where they use keywords and details from your detail page to decide what your product is and what applies to it. Amazon does this automatically, and I am very proud to have been part of the development of those processes because Amazon's catalog was so big that the traditional methods of evaluating a product, which you can do if you're an expert and you're doing things one-on-one, just wouldn't work at Amazon. We actually had people who were actually advocating that, like going through it one by one. And I'm just like, that's not going to work. We'd have to hire like 1,000 people. Like, it's not going to work. I don't even know if there are that many experts to hire. So no, it's not going to work. So it's all kind of automated based on keywords, and then exceptions are tossed out to the experts. So that way they can manage such a big catalog. So you want to make sure that you know what Amazon is going to say about your product before you submit it. So we talked about how if you choose a particular item type keyword, then it's going to be flagged more than likely. If you choose a particular phrase in your detail page, then it could sound like it's HAZMAT. There's a whole bunch of different things that are basically flagged off of these keywords so that Amazon can control their risk, so that Amazon can manage safety for customers. They do a really good job of this. They also have a lot of problems because they're trying to do this at scale. They're trying to do so many products at once. And so there are challenges there. So you need to know what your product is and what the requirements are so that when Amazon messes up, which they can do and have done, you can come back at them and say, okay, here's the issue. I've changed this part of my page. I've changed this verbiage. Here's what I've changed on my warning label, whatever the case may be. And then you know about it going in, because there's nothing worse than launching a product, finding out that something's wrong, and then having to fix it as quickly as possible. And the very worst team to do that with are the ones that have legal restrictions, because that team has to get approval from an escalated team that is very small. And as you might imagine, that creates a bottleneck. So then you can't really get it done very quickly. A lot of the ones that go through, you can get it done fairly quickly, like HAZMAT is relatively fast. Usually it's resolved within 2 to 7 days. Some of the restricted product stuff is not resolved for up to a month, which can be really painful. So getting it done ahead of time is definitely less painful.
I was just going to say, being proactive about that. If you're in the development process, probably the first part of benchmarking, not just knowing what product you want to do and what materials you want to use and all that kind of stuff, but what regulations are surrounding your product so that you can develop it within those specifications and be proactive about avoiding the problems down the road.
Yeah, that's the very first thing that we do when we research a new product, is we actually have a process where we go and research the particular requirements as well as the import requirements. So double check that too, because every agency that has jurisdiction over a product will have a slightly different way of looking at it. And things that are required at import may not be the same things that are required when you're selling. So there's actually different agency jurisdictions too. So just because you can get it in through the import process doesn't mean that it's actually legal to sell in the US, which is kind of crazy, but it's actually possible to import things that are illegal to sell, which is, yeah, it's crazy, but you can.
Awesome, thank you. We had 2 questions. One of them, we can, if you think we're out of time, we can ask next week. It's not super urgent, but in the chat, somebody asked if they should register their business in every state where Amazon has warehouses in order to collect sales taxes. And I know that's the nexus and all that. It's been been a huge conversation. And I know that there are companies that can help figure those things out, but what's your opinion on that?
Yeah. So my opinion before the Supreme Court decision was different. So before the Supreme Court decision, the main decision that informed this was the Quill decision, which basically was about software in the mail in South Dakota. And the idea being that if you weren't physically located in that state, then it wasn't fair to make anyone take on the burden of paying sales tax in that state. Just because the postal service was there doesn't mean that you are, and so you don't need to pay taxes. This year, that decision was basically overturned. The details of it are a little bit kind of sketchy, and the particular case that was ruled in favor of the state was very specific to that state. So it said something like at least 200 sales in South Dakota, or at least a certain amount of money in South Dakota. And the nice thing about that, of course, is that South Dakota is tiny, so the likelihood of you actually having that many sales in South Dakota is somewhat low. So that particular case was for that particular state, but what that means is that it's kind of opening up this whole can of worms for the other states to start trying to push their opinion of what sales tax should be. So right now, I would not register in every state. To be completely, perfectly honest with you, I would not. And the reason being is as soon as you register, then you open yourself up to a whole bunch of other issues. Because if you're registered for sales tax in a state, then they're going to start being like, hey, wait a second. Aren't you supposed to pay some other taxes to us? Shouldn't you be paying, like in Washington State, we have B&O tax. Shouldn't you be paying some B&O tax? Because you're obviously registered for sales tax, so you must be doing business in our state, and therefore you need to pay us more in taxes. So as soon as you open yourself up to the sales tax question, all the agencies in a state will share the information. And then now, excuse me, you could be on the hook for a whole bunch of other taxes. Another thing that you think about is that you're not just paying per state. The state is also collecting that information, and the local counties and cities will be looking at that information and then start bugging you for their remittance. There are thousands of jurisdictions here. So anyone who thinks that they just need to register and pay in 20 states and it's going to be super easy and TaxJar is going to help you do it, that is a very simplistic approach to this. The reality is that there are thousands and thousands of these tax jurisdictions, and once you start trying to do that, it's a huge burden. So I would expect that for an average company, maybe if you're selling 50 to 100K on Amazon a month, this could be a burden of a full-time person if you actually tried to pay all of your taxes properly. So a lot of people who are in small business, if it's onerous and too difficult to do it, will find a way not to. So my expectation is that the dissenting opinion, where they said this is an onerous burden, will eventually, it'll go back to the Supreme Court and they'll argue about this, and there'll be some sort of threshold. So a very small business will be exempt. So like the South Dakota requirement had a small business exemption. I expect there to be small business exemptions in general. We just don't know what it's going to be. So for now, I certainly would not register. Now, the exceptions are going to be places where they know who you are because Amazon's filing on your behalf. So that's Washington, I believe Pennsylvania, and Oklahoma. Double check what's happening in your tax payments. You should be able to see in the tax settings in your seller central account. It'll be grayed out for the states that Amazon's already collecting on your behalf. For those ones, Amazon is collecting on your behalf and reporting it to the state. So be aware of that. That's already happening. Now, if the state of Washington is collecting $10 in sales tax from you, the likelihood of them going after you is extremely low. But if you, for whatever reason, are doing a lot of business in the state of Washington, Amazon's collecting it and reporting it to the state of Washington, then you better make sure that you file your paperwork correctly. So hopefully at some point, Amazon will take all this over for sellers, or it will be exempt for small businesses. But for now, I would not move forward with registering everywhere else because the can of worms is just so darn big. Make sure that you're in compliance where people know who you are, and that's the states that Amazon is currently remitting to, and where you actually are registered. So we obviously pay all of our taxes and make sure everything is up to date in the state of Washington because that's where we're registered. So make sure that everything that you're doing in your own state is done properly.
Cool. I'll save the other question. It's more product development related. I'll save it for next week. So if you're listening, you have to tune in.
Awesome. All right. If there are any more questions, then try to get them in quick. Otherwise, you can always post on the replay. And thank you guys who stuck with us for being patient. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
And maybe I need to switch to a different internet service provider. All right. Thank you all very much, and see you next week.
Bye.